gone by. It feels like it was literally just yesterday of last week. Today, I'm gonna go through all of the essentials that you'll need to start your sourdough journey. Now, as you know, I've only been doing this for 6 months, so this is a comprehensive list for someone who's been doing this for 6 months. This is not an end-all be-all. I am not saying that my list is superior and should be followed and, you know, it's textbook. It's just things that I found to be super helpful when I started my sourdough journey, and I just wanted to pass that along and share with y'all. I believe there's a good bit of you who haven't tried making sourdough yet, so if you haven't yet, go watch my last video and I'll take you through the full process. But this is everything you kind of need to get started before you start that next video. So let's get right into the most important thing, flour. So my favorite flour, the only flour that I've ever singularly used this entire process, is the King Arthur's bread flour. It has, I believe, I could be wrong, I don't have it in front of me, I believe it's 12.7% protein, and you're looking for a flour that has higher than 10% protein because that's what's gonna help it grow, that's what's gonna help it build. Just think of like your body, you know, you're supposed to have 1 gram of protein to build muscle or maintain muscle, and you know, if you wanna build more muscle, then you add more protein. The same thing kind of applies here, so you want a higher protein content level so that way your bread has a higher chance of growing. I mean, as simple as that can be put down. If you're using regular all-purpose flour, it's not that it wouldn't work, it's just that you'll need some other leavening agents involved, and then that becomes a completely different bread. So highly, highly, highly recommend King Arthur's. You can find it at any local grocery store. I found it at Walmart, I found it at my local grocery store, also at Sam's, or I believe Costco has it as well, if you're, you know, more familiar with those areas, or if there's, you know, a different grocery store nearby. I think most places they'll have it. If not, I'll leave the link down below to where you can shop it online. It's $6, it's nothing crazy. If it was crazy, I wouldn't have done it. Let me put that first and foremost. So these are the bare necessities. Let's get through the bare necessities, and then we'll add like the extraneous things that you might want later down the road. So bare necessities, you're gonna need bread flour. Like I said, higher protein content. You want above 10, above 12 is preferable. So if you find a 13, a 15, whatever that number may be for you, for the flour that you have found, just make sure it's a little bit above 10%. And you'll see that in the corner of the bag. It'll tell you straight up, just like a normal nutrition fact. It'll be like 12.7% protein, something like that. So just look for that in the corner and you'll see it. And then you need something to hold your starter in. So some type of jar. The jar needs to have some type of lid. If you are making a starter within a jar with no lid, there's a good chance it's not gonna grow properly. And I don't know the science behind it. I'm not claiming that I know the science behind it, but you want to have a little bit of coverage. I think just to keep, you know, the external things out of it, but also so the oxygen can oxygenate the starter without it suffocating it. That is the last thing you want. You want your starter to have an easy, free-flowing way of growing. You don't want it to be in too warm of an area, aka burning in the sun. You don't want it to be suffocating, either without a lid or with a lid that's screwed on tight because it can't breathe. How is it gonna oxygenate? Think of your starter as a living, breathing thing. The second you think of it like that, the second you'll remember to feed it, number one. Because when I was just thinking of a starter, I'd be like, it's fine. And then if I think of it like I would think of my dog, she needs to eat, you know? So whenever you start thinking of your starter, think of it as a living, breathing thing. So it needs water, it needs food, and it needs to breathe. If you're up in the mountains over in Colorado, there's a higher chance of it having less oxygen. It's harder for you to breathe. You're not able to function the way that your body is normally meant to function. And that really affects your body the same way that if you were underwater and trying to breathe, you couldn't, right? So think of it in those terms. You need some type of container. It can be a glass jar. That's what I've always used it in. I've put it in mason jars that I had laying around. I've also seen it in other kinds of jars. I'm not very knowledgeable on kinds of jars in the world, if I'm honest. I mainly see them in glass jars. I've never tried anything different. That doesn't mean it's not possible or probable that it would grow in that way. Just some type of jar that has a lid. Now, you're not gonna put the lid on. If you're using a mason jar, think of the little lip versus the ring. You're gonna put the lip about 70% of the way on. You need it to have airflow, but you don't want it open and you don't want it completely shut. And then the other things you're gonna need: a bowl, right? You're gonna have to have something to put your bread in that you're eventually gonna bake, right? So I use an acrylic bowl. I love that bowl. I don't know where I got it from. Can't find it to buy it again. I wish I could, but I've used plastic bowls as well, just regular mixing bowls, and those are fine. I just think my bread comes out better with an acrylic bowl. That's just personally me. Could be in my head as well. Could be a placebo. Who knows? I am known to really fall for placebos. So I use a bowl, and then you're gonna need some type of dish towel. If you are in a kitchen and you're thinking about making sourdough, I almost guarantee that you have a tea towel, whether it's your Grammy's, your mom's, your auntie's, whoever's tea towel that you inherited along down the road, you'll have a tea towel. If not, go to Marshall's. They're like $4.99 and you can get a pack of 2. I do that for every single season. I love it. Dollar General sells them, Walmart sells them, Dollar Tree sells them. Literally any possible store, Michael's even sells them, like craft stores sell them. So there's not a place you can't find a tea towel. It's not something unattainable. I have a favorite that I'm showing you right now. I only use those for my sourdough bread. I am superstitious, as you know. So that is all I've ever used, and that's what I'll continue to use until I find another set like that. I don't know where I got it from, but that is what I'm gonna continue to use. But any tea towel works. Linen, cotton, polyester, those are all work fine. You just need something to cover it, so as it's growing, in between those stretch and folds, it's being covered and saved from those external things like we mentioned with the jar. And then you're gonna need a Dutch oven. So a Dutch oven can vary in size, in price. You can get 2 quarts, you can get 5 quarts, you can get 6 quarts. It doesn't really matter. If you are in the sourdough realm thought mindset, I almost guarantee that you have a Dutch oven, or you can obtain a Dutch oven quite easily, because you're already cooking. I imagine you've already, started making stews or soups or things of that nature, and you already have a Dutch oven or something equivalent. But if you don't, if this is your new thing and you've never tried baking, you've never tried cooking before, you don't have a family of 7 or 4 or whatever your family size is, Walmart has them. That's where mine's from. I got it for Christmas. Target also sells the exact same one. I'll link it below. I found great success in it. The enamel hasn't peeled off. It hasn't gotten super dirty or anything, and it sustained 6 months of baking, and I expect it to sustain longer than 6 months. Amazon always has it. Marshall's has them. I've heard Aldi has like singular size, so if you want to make a little bit of a smaller loaf, you can also go to Aldi and get a Dutch oven there. They are not, again, like tea towels, they're not unattainable. They're very easy to find. You just have to know where to look for them. Cast iron's probably the best one. Covered in enamel, those are great because you're going to be putting it at such a high heat. So just make sure that your Dutch oven can handle something of that high level heat and be okay. If it's Dutch oven, chances are it's gonna be fine, but you are cooking in that higher temperature, so the 400 pluses, depending on where you live or depending on how your oven bakes, whatever it may be, but you're gonna stick in those higher range of temperatures, so just make sure that your Dutch oven can accommodate those temperatures, and you should be chilling. Now, these are the extraneous things that you might not really need, but can add if you feel like it. If you're the type of person who needs everything put into like a kit so you can get started and you feel confident to go and ready, then these are the things that you can add to make a complete sourdough kit. If you are a bare bones girly and you just want to get started and you don't really care to be like super aesthetic, stick with the bare essentials. You'll do fine. You'll have an amazing bread afterwards. These are just things I've found are useful. They're tools more so. So if you want the bare essentials plus tools, stick around for this part and I'll explain what I think you could add to your repertoire just to make a better bake. Number 1, being a raiser. Now, you have seen my scoring skills and they're still not up to par. Again, I will say this every single video until someone does it. If you have scoring advice, tips videos you watch, people you follow that are amazing scorers, and you want to impart that knowledge upon me, please do. It just never turns out to how I want it to be, but that is besides the point. You're going to need a razor of some sort. If you are going to be scoring your bread, and you should, you can use a paring knife if you're going back to the bare essentials. You can use just a sharp knife and score it that way. That's how we did it at my bakery. But now I feel fancy and cool, so I have a razor that I score with. But bare essentials versus, you know, the full kit, we're talking about this type of razor here to help you get a prettier score. You know, if you want to put flowers in there, if you want to put vines or, you know, things of that nature, you want your bread to look beautiful and pretty and meticulous, and you want to take the extra time and make it look like an art piece, this is what you would need. Again, if you just want to score your bread and eat it like any normal person would want to do, you can just use a knife. So that's not to say you can't have a razor in both of these situations, but if you're going, again, back to the bare necessities, a knife's fine. But a razor for this like extra kit that I think would just add an extra level to your sourdough. And then also a spatula. This spatula has quite dramatically changed my life, and that is being dramatic in itself, but I'll tell you what, it's just a perfect spatula. I can't even explain it. I hate spatulas that are so flimsy. You feel like you're just like literally dragging it around and it does nothing. This is a nice firm spatula, and then at the end there's a little bit of wiggle so you can, you know, manipulate the things that you want it to manipulate. But chef's kits, it is so good. People use bread whisks. Again, if you want to get fancy with it, you can absolutely add a bread whisk, but I just literally have a spatula and that's what I mix my bread with, and I love it, and it's everything and more, truly and honestly. Now, this is one of those things that could go either way, depending on how you're thinking. Now I've imagined two different kits in my mind, so I'm sorry that this is happening, but now this is where my brain is headed. This is the thing that could go on either end. So I have a baking mat, right? I got it for Christmas, love it, use it, here for it. I use it in place of parchment paper because I found the parchment paper was starting to stick to my bread, number one, and two, it would make a different kind of like burn mark on the bottom, and I wasn't really a fan of that. Sometimes it would be hard to cut into. So I use a baking mat in lieu of parchment paper, but parchment paper could be on either section as well as a baking mat. It just kind of depends on what your preference is. If you have parchment paper, works fine. If you want to eventually step up to a baking mat, works fine as well. Like, just kind of depends on your preference. If you want none of the above, that's fine too. I think you could probably use something else in replacement, but I'm not quite sure. If you only use parchment paper and you stay on my parchment paper, that is your ministry, and I respect that for you. I just personally have found, for me, it doesn't work in where my climate or my oven, whatever it may be. I've just found I prefer the baking mat, and it's not something I thought of. A baking mat supposed to go in the oven anyway, so it wasn't like anything of a weird like substitution in any way. Like, it was just literally equivalent swap, so that's what I did. And then a banneton basket. So overnight you can see that I put my bread in this funky looking like swirly bird bowl that's got a little bit of like a cloth in between. This is like the extra kit here. Banneton baskets, you can have them round, you can have them long, like a hot dog, you can have them like an extra long hot dog. Just kind of depends on what kind of bread you want to make. If you are more into like the sandwich style, then the longer one is going to be your thing. If you want just a regular loaf like I make, circular one's fine. This is something you can have at the beginning, which I did, or you can add to it later if you want to eventually step up. You found that you love baking sourdough so much that you want it to be elevated, whatever the case may be. Banneton baskets are in either this or that type of situation. Like, if you want to just start out with Banneton baskets so you're familiar with them, then I would recommend getting those from the start. They're fairly cheap. You can get them in a kit like I did, and you never really have to think about it ever again. You can also just use a bowl and a tea towel, which goes back to like the bare necessities kit. Like, we are just using the same bowl that we had and we're covering it with a tea towel, putting it in the fridge, calling it a day. That's totally fine, because that's essentially what it is. You've got a bowl with the tea towel material equivalent inside of it, and you're just wrapping it in bread. And then I put a plastic bag over mine. If you don't put a plastic bag over yours, all the power to you. I just heard to do that, and I've never not done it. And again, I'm superstitious. Say it with me, everyone, superstitious. And so I do it every single time. But you could literally just leave it in a bowl with a tea towel and you'd be A-okay, I promise you that. And then the last thing that I would recommend for you is a cooling rack. This is a bare necessities / extra equivalent. If you are baking, if you've ever thought about baking, chances are you have two things. You have a pan and you have a cooling rack. I don't know where you got it from. I inherited mine somehow. They just showed up in my kitchen one day. And when I was originally making sourdough bread, I let it cool on this, you can't really see it, but this like little cake dish. It's wood, so number one, it was burning the wood. And number two, I didn't think of it. Cooling racks exist, so there's an even cooling time throughout the entire dessert or bake that you've made, or pastry, whatever it may be. So it can cool evenly throughout. If you're setting it on something, once you've taken it out of the oven, chances are everything else around it is cooling, but the bottom is still cooking. Regardless of how cool your house is or whatever it may be, that is still baking. So you need to make sure that you're giving it a chance to cool down properly and evenly, because otherwise, again, you're gonna get that like really, really stiff bottom. And if that's what you want a little crunch at the bottom, that is for you. But if you're looking just to eat like a normal piece of bread, I would recommend getting a cooling rack. You can get a set of two, you can get a larger one, you can get a smaller one. I mean, your bread's gonna be about this big if you're making the traditional round loaf that I make. So you need something that just literally holds or hosts that. I've gotten so desperate at times because my husband used the cooling rack that I've taken it from the grill. Like we had an extension of like a cooling rack for the grill, and I've put it on top of 2 bowls and I've had it cool that way. Just, you need to get it off the ground if you want it to cool evenly and properly throughout. If you want to have a little bit of crunch at the bottom, leave it. You don't need it, doesn't matter. But if you would like for it to stop baking, number one, allow your bread to cool properly, then I would recommend you get a cooling rack. And that was a lot. I will say that was a lot, but that is literally all that you need. I know sourdough seems so overwhelming, and I promise you it's not. I pinky promise you it's not. It's flour, water, and a Dutch oven with an oven. You're gonna need an oven. I never said that. You're gonna need an oven. So if you're without an oven, find a friend, phone a parent, phone a cousin, phone whoever, and use their oven. But that's all you're literally gonna need. I promise you it's not as difficult or as involved as it seems. I know it can be overwhelming, and I promise you, if you just take it step by step and do them to the best of your ability, you're gonna get a good bake and you're gonna be fine. You do not need to get all this extraneous things and get overwhelmed and think you have to do 400 grams of this and 300 grams of this and blah, blah, blah. Like, you're good, I promise you. I still use a metal spoon. If you wanna go out and get a wood spoon to stir your starter, by all means, do that. If you want a Weck jar versus a regular mason jar you found at Goodwill, do that. It's all about personal preference, but these are the things that I've found led me to the best bakes, the quickest bakes, and they had the most consistency. And that's what I'm always going for, is consistency. I want to make sure that whatever I'm putting out and giving to people is going to look the same across the board, and that is what I found with these products. Again, I will link whatever I can down below. I don't get anything from it, but if you just want to, if you're as superstitious as I am and you just want to make sure that your bake is going to turn out the way that it should, I will leave those down below for you and you can get started. And then, like I said, my last video takes you through the whole process. So if you are ready to get baking and get started today, I would recommend grabbing all those things and then starting on the next video, and I'll link it at the end of the video so you can have easy access to it. But that is all that I have for you today, friends. I love having you here. I'm so grateful that you are, and I hope to see you all in the next one.